In one of the days of the year 1976, these two girls were sitting in their car on the side of the road when a strange man approached them. Suddenly, he pulled out a gun and shot at them. After this crime, a message arrived to the police. This message was from the killer, boasting about his crime. At that moment, the police realized they were dealing with a serial killer because there had been 5 previous victims. This killer became known as the Son of Sam, the murderer who terrorized New York City in the 1970s. People were afraid to go outside their homes to the extent that girls started cutting their hair and dyeing it different colors so they wouldn't be targeted. Why do we know this story? The Son of Sam is considered one of the most famous serial killers in American history. Many dramatic films, documentaries, and well-known TV series have been made about him. The Son of Sam also loved fame, so he would send messages to journalists and the police, boasting about his crimes and trying to mislead and manipulate them. This killer was caught in one of the strangest ways. He was caught because of a traffic violation. But how? That's what we'll find out in this story that awaits you, full of thrilling events. So get ready and enjoy. The events of our story talk about this serial killer named David Berkowitz, known by the nickname Son of Sam. He was born on June 1st, 1953, in New York City. He was the result of an illegitimate relationship between his biological mother, Betty, and a married businessman. The man didn't want any connection with him and told her if she wanted to raise him, she would have to do it on her own, completely abandoning him. Betty, whose situation was difficult, especially financially, realized she couldn't raise him, so she gave him up for adoption. The new couple who adopted David were unable to have children, so they were the perfect family to welcome a child in need. However, when David was 7 years old, his adoptive father accidentally let slip the word adoption. From that moment, David knew he wasn't their biological son, and this revelation began causing him psychological issues. Moreover, during that period, he suffered a head injury in a car accident. To this day, it's unclear whether this accident contributed to forming the disturbed personality we would later witness. David gradually became more isolated and struggled to make friends. He found it hard to interact naturally with his classmates at school. Eventually, his parents began taking him to see psychologists. His mother was very affectionate towards him and loved him dearly, whereas his father was somewhat distant. In fact, his father even considered adopting him a mistake, though he never said it directly. Through his actions, however, it was clear enough. Thus, from his early childhood, this boy began accumulating many psychological problems. The worst happened when he reached the age of 14. He decided to join the army no matter what, but eventually returned to live in New York City. This time, he lived independently, completely cutting ties with his father and leaving him behind. Initially, his ambition was to become a firefighter, but when circumstances didn't allow it, he reluctantly accepted a job as a security guard with a very modest salary. Most of his shifts were at night, so he often sat thinking to himself. From the beginning, he felt like an outsider and alone, knowing that people didn't accept him. He harbored internal pain and would observe someone walking down the street with their wife or girlfriend, seeing happiness evident on their faces, which fueled his hatred towards people and the world. From here, his thoughts began taking dangerous turns. David later attempted to reconnect with his biological mother, Betty, who had given him up for adoption. He tried to cling to something that might return him to being a normal human being, feeling himself sinking into darkness and realizing he was reaching levels he hadn't before in his life. He managed to reach his biological mother, Betty, who was delighted when they met. They talked and began forming a lovely relationship, with repeated visits between them. David once again felt the love and warmth of a mother's affection, experiencing happiness with his true mother for the first time. However, this happiness wouldn't last long. David discovered that his mother had another daughter, his half-sister, whom she raised and cherished while he was given up for adoption. These feelings of hatred returned once more. He felt like the abandoned child that even his mother didn't want. Once again, he cut off communication with his mother and returned to his isolation, darkness, and vengeful thoughts. Many psychological analysts say that during this time, he developed a complex towards women due to his mother. Here, he returned to his old obsession, fire. Fire was one of the things he felt could release his anger and negative emotions. Over the next 3 years, imagine this, David set more than 1,500 fires in various parts of New York. Most of these fires were small and didn't lead to deaths, but he recorded all of them, writing them down in his diary. Later, he developed an attraction to satanic cults, worshiping the devil and embracing crazy ideas. He began reading their books and adopting their ideologies, which drew him deeper and deeper into darkness. Imagine spending the entire month of November 1975 isolating himself from the world. He even covered the windows with blankets and nailed them shut so no sunlight could enter, living in complete darkness and solitude for that whole month. He then started scribbling, drawing, and writing strange writings on the walls, demonic drawings and notes about the voices he heard in his head, which he claimed were demonic voices commanding him to kill. On December 24, 1975, he moved to a new apartment in a new area where he had a neighbor named Sam, an elderly man in his 60s. Sam had a dog that barked incessantly, disturbing David every day and night. The constant barking wouldn't stop, so David convinced himself that the dog was possessed by a demon and that its barking was a command from that demon telling him to kill. One day, unable to bear the dog's barking any longer, David took a Molotov cocktail and threw it at his neighbor's garden. However, the Molotov cocktail didn't hit the dog. The neighbor, Sam, naturally reported the incident to the police, who investigated but couldn't trace the culprit back to David. The dog survived and continued barking the following days. David took this as a sign that he must continue committing murders, believing the demon inside the dog was telling him to kill and wouldn't leave him alone. Thinking that knives hadn't worked in his initial murder attempts, he decided to use a .44 caliber revolver instead. On Thursday, July 29, 1976, David committed his first murder with this gun. He got into his car and started roaming the streets looking for a victim. At that time, there were 2 girls, Donna, 18, and Judy, 19. These 2 girls were sitting in their car, parked on the side of the road after returning from a late-night outing. Judy, who was driving, dropped her friend Donna off at her apartment, parking near the building while they chatted before saying goodbye. Suddenly, a strange man approached the car window, pulled out a gun, and began shooting at them. David fired 5 shots and then fled immediately. Donna, 18, was fatally shot in the neck and died, while her friend Judy was wounded in the thigh but survived. Naturally, investigators came to examine the crime scene and determined from the bullet that the weapon used was a rare .44 caliber revolver. Keep this in mind. David later admitted that after leaving the crime scene, he sang in his car on the way home, feeling elated and victorious for having taken a life, especially a happy one, unlike his own miserable existence. He felt empowered, as if he could control others' happiness and suffering, placing himself on another level above them. The police couldn't determine the motive behind the crime and considered it just another random gang-related killing since crimes were rampant in New York during the 1970s, with the highest crime rates in all of America. Therefore, a murder like this didn't shock public opinion or create a significant stir, which frustrated David. When he opened the newspapers the next morning and didn't see his crime headlining the news, he felt his crime was worthless, as if his efforts had gone in vain. He wanted his crime to dominate the headlines and shake the city, yet it remained just one among many crimes occurring in the city. In his later confession, David recounted going to a large mall in Westchester, where nobody paid attention to him or recognized him. He expressed wishing he had a machine gun to open fire on everyone so they'd know who he was, a killer craving fame. Hence, to gain the attention he desired, he committed crimes again. The next crime occurred on October 23, 1976. Same as before, he drove around seeking a victim. He went to a street in New York known as Lover's Lane, assuming lovers were the happiest people and wanting to ruin their happiness. There was a young man sitting in his car with his girlfriend, named Carl Denaro. As seen in the photo, Carl had long hair, and apparently David targeted him because of his fixation on women due to his mother issues. He pursued them with his car until they stopped on the side of the road. Then, mirroring his first crime, he parked behind them, got out of his car calmly, approached the window, pulled out his gun, and suddenly began firing. The first bullet shattered the window, and one of the bullets seemed to hit Carl in the head. However, his girlfriend managed to escape from the car unharmed. After firing several shots, David ran away. She returned to the car to find Carl bleeding profusely and unresponsive, though she couldn't tell if he was dead or unconscious. She immediately drove him to the nearest hospital, miraculously surviving despite being shot in the head. A month after the incident, on November 27, 1976, David went hunting for a new victim. He found two girls, ages 16 and 18, sitting on the steps of a house. He raised his gun and fired at them, but once again, only one of them, Joan, was paralyzed from the waist down, unable to walk. Still, you begin to wonder how most of this killer's victims survived despite his numerous attempts. He tried to kill 8 people, but succeeded in killing only 1, even though he shot them from close range. It's quite astonishing that despite his many attempts, he actually killed only once. The second murder occurred shortly afterward, on January 30th, 1977. That night, a 26-year-old woman named Christine was heading home with her fiancé after watching a movie at the cinema. On their way, David spotted them and followed them in his car until they stopped on the side of the road. Like the previous victims, he parked behind them, got out of his car calmly, walked up to the window, pulled out his gun, and opened fire. This time, Christine died instantly, hit in the head and neck, while her fiancé managed to survive without any injuries. This provided further evidence that David primarily focused on women, making Christine his second successful murder victim. From this crime onward, the police began noticing similarities linking it to previous incidents, particularly the type of weapon used. As mentioned earlier, the gun David used was a rare .44 caliber revolver. Although the attacks appeared random and unrelated, the type of weapon began connecting them. From here, the police started referring to David as the .44 caliber killer based on the weapon he used. Additionally, the police noticed a pattern among the victims. Most were women with long, dark hair. This pattern was reaffirmed with the next victim on March 1, 1977. That day, a student named Virginia was returning home from university, carrying her books. Seeing no one nearby, David approached her, stopped in front of her, and raised his gun. Virginia instinctively raised her books to shield her face, trying to protect herself, but the perpetrator shot through the books, hitting her in the head and killing her. What was peculiar about this crime was the timing. It was 7:30 p.m., still relatively early. Previous crimes had been committed in the middle of the night or early morning hours. This was the first time David dared to commit a murder at such an early hour, indicating his growing confidence. When the police examined the bullets from this latest crime and confirmed they were .44 caliber, just like the previous ones, they were certain they were dealing with a serial killer. 2 days after this crime, the police chief of New York City held a press conference, announcing they were pursuing a serial killer who appeared to be targeting victims randomly, but mostly focusing on women. Finally, David achieved the attention he craved. His name dominated headlines and newspapers, becoming widely known under the alias Son of Sam. Fear gripped New York City. Parents forbade their children from going out unless it was for school or college, and everyone avoided going out at night regardless of age. People also noticed a specific pattern among the victims. The killer usually targeted young women with long, dark, or brown hair. Consequently, women in the city began flocking to salons to cut their hair, dye it blonde, or wear wigs. The situation in the city was truly insane. Fear and panic spread everywhere, despite the fact that, as mentioned earlier, the killer had only successfully murdered 3 people thus far. The randomness and frequency of his crimes sent people into a state of paranoia, each fearing they might be the next victim. This, of course, prompted the New York Police Department to take the case very seriously, forming a team of the best detectives and officers called Operation Omega 30. Their sole mission was to capture the .44 caliber killer. David struck again on April 17, 1977. This time, the victims were a couple named Alexander and Valentina. Alexander was 20 and Valentina was 18. Like the previous victims, they were sitting in their car on the side of the road at 3 a.m. Knowing there was a killer targeting people in cars, David approached, put his hand on the trigger, raised his gun, and fired. This time, he shot through the front windshield, resulting in both victims dying. The increased fatality rate compared to earlier attempts indicated that David had become calmer and more confident in committing his crimes. He now took his time aiming carefully and didn't panic, making him even more terrifying. Once again, David left a note for the police at the crime scene, found next to the car. The note read, "I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a stranger to you. I am programmed on a different wavelength than everyone else, programmed to kill. To stop me, you must kill me. I am a predatory beast. I love hunting. I roam the streets searching for my prey. I love tender flesh. The women of New York are the most beautiful." David signed the letter with the name Son of Sam, the alias he used for himself. Quickly, his name shifted in the media from .44 caliber killer to Son of Sam, the name he became infamous for. At the time, no one understood the meaning of the name or its origin, but later it was revealed that David took it from his elderly neighbor, Sam, the one with the barking dog. As previously mentioned, David believed his neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon, and its continuous barking was a command from the devil telling him to kill. Somehow, he associated this belief with his neighbor and named himself Son of Sam. David continued to suffer from the dog's barking, considering himself tormented and even sending anonymous threatening letters to his neighbor. Of course, these letters never revealed his identity. As mentioned earlier, one of the times he attempted to kill the dog, he threw a Molotov cocktail into his neighbor's garden. On April 27, 1977, he tried again, this time with a rifle. He aimed at the dog from his bedroom window and fired, but investigators couldn't determine the source of the shot. About a month later, David wrote a new letter, this time addressed to a famous journalist named Jimmy, one of the most renowned reporters in all of New York. If David wanted maximum publicity, Jimmy was the ideal journalist for the job. In his lengthy letter to Jimmy, David discussed all his crimes, specifically mentioning Donna, his first victim. He noted it had been a year since her murder and described her as a sweet girl, urging them to commemorate her somehow. Of course, this was infuriating to her family. How dare the man who killed her speak as if he were sympathetic? In the same letter, David encouraged the police in their efforts to catch him, wishing them luck and success. He humorously added that when they finally apprehended him, he would buy each of them a new pair of shoes if he had the money. Clearly, this letter reflected the mindset of someone mentally unstable. Unsurprisingly, this letter created even more buzz around the case, terrifying the public further. Following its publication in the newspapers, the police received over 250 calls daily from people reporting suspicious individuals, including neighbors, lovers, or even spouses. The city was in chaos, and the police and detectives worked tirelessly. Every officer in the NYPD was dedicated to solving this case, which remains the largest manhunt in the department's history. They even created sketches of Son of Sam based on descriptions from surviving victims, although these sketches weren't very accurate since most victims didn't get a clear look at his face. One of the police's attempts involved placing a dummy in a car parked on the side of the road, hoping to use it as bait to lure Son of Sam. However, the greatest challenge remained capturing him as quickly as possible, as they knew he would strike again. The pressure on the police and investigators was immense. And indeed, as expected, on June 26, 1977, Son of Sam struck again. As usual, his victims were a couple named Judy and Sal, sitting in their car on the side of the road. He ambushed them, firing at them suddenly. This time, both survived, although Judy was shot 3 times and Sal once. A month later, on July 31, 1977, he struck again. Same as before, The victims were a couple, Stacy, a blonde woman, and Robert, both 20 years old. This attack terrified New York City even more than the previous ones because Stacy was blonde, breaking the established pattern of targeting women with dark hair. Her parents were initially reassured by others that this killer didn't target blondes, but this time was different. For the first time, he targeted a blonde woman. Using his usual method, he approached their car, ambushed them, and fired. Stacy died, while her boyfriend Robert survived but lost his eyesight, becoming blind. This particular crime caused mass hysteria across the city. The New York Post headline screamed on the front page, "No one is safe from Son of Sam." Even the media played a role in amplifying fear, leaving no sense of security. People who had previously felt somewhat safe now lost that illusion. Everyone in New York City was terrified, fearing they could be the next victim. It's remarkable how one person could terrify an entire city. Let's hear from one of the journalists who lived through these events and remarked that it's impossible to exaggerate how much fear consumed the city. Some might argue that surely it wasn't that bad since it was just one person. But no, the fear was real. The entire city was in a state of panic, plagued by nightmares despite the relatively few victims. A random serial killer is one of the most feared types of criminals, and David reveled in the notoriety he achieved. All his aspirations for fame were coming true, and he enjoyed each crime more than the last. Meanwhile, the police intensified their efforts to the maximum degree possible. There were 75 investigators working on the case, supported by 225 police officers, totaling 300 officers chasing one man. Their sole focus was on him. Investigators were examining the latest crime involving Stacy, the blonde woman. After several days of investigation, they found a crucial witness, a 49-year-old woman named Cecilia. On the night of the crime, Cecilia was walking down a street near the crime scene and, just minutes before the murder, saw a suspicious man who appeared to be concealing something under his clothes. She felt fear upon seeing him and quickly turned around to return home. Moments later, she heard gunshots. When she learned about the crime the next day, she became convinced that the man she saw was connected to it. So, how could they identify this man? Here comes the critical detail. Cecilia told investigators that she saw a police officer issuing a traffic ticket to a car parked near a fire hydrant. Parking near a fire hydrant is illegal because it obstructs emergency vehicles. Cecilia suspected that the car receiving the ticket belonged to the suspicious man she saw, as he appeared to have just exited it. Investigators checked records but found no record of a ticket issued in that area that night. Despite this, Cecilia insisted, claiming she was certain she saw a police officer issuing a ticket. The investigators returned to the station and reviewed the records again, finding nothing. However, Cecilia remained adamant. Finally, one investigator personally visited the precinct and questioned the patrol officer responsible for the area that night. The officer admitted that he had issued tickets but forgot to log them in the system that night, filing them the next day instead. Upon reviewing those records, they discovered 4 tickets issued that night, one of which was for a car registered to David Berkowitz. Imagine this. If Cecilia hadn't insisted on the importance of the parking ticket and her certainty about seeing it, the police might never have caught him. Perhaps they would have dismissed her account as unreliable, and David could have remained free. By sheer coincidence, they located David's car. Observing it closely, they noticed a rifle partially concealed in the back seat. Breaking the glass, they entered the vehicle and found a letter written in the same handwriting as Son of Sam. The letter mocked the police, stating, "You can't stop me. I'll drive you mad." Ironically, they read this letter before he even had a chance to send it. At this point, the police were certain that David was Son of Sam. They surrounded his car, hiding and waiting. After approximately 4 hours, David emerged from his apartment and got into his car. Before he could start it, all the officers rushed towards him. The leader of the task force ran toward him, gun drawn, shouting, "Police, don't move." David slowly turned his head, smiling, and said, "Finally, you've caught me." He appeared calm and confident, as if he always knew he'd be caught eventually. After his arrest, they placed him in the police car to transport him to the main police station in New York City. Journalists were already informed and awaited his arrival with cameras ready. Sitting in the car, David spoke casually to the officers, still smiling, and jokingly asked them to comb his hair before he met the press. When Son of Sam arrived at the station, a large crowd of people and reporters gathered to see the man who had terrorized New York City for the past year. He smiled as he walked, almost proudly, as if being honored for his achievements. Investigators and officials held a major press conference, displaying his weapons and the evidence against him to confirm that Son of Sam had been captured and the nightmare of New York City had ended. The police searched his apartment, uncovering shocking items. First, they found newspaper clippings he had collected about his crimes, along with pictures of his victims, which he had cut out and hung on his walls. Additionally, they discovered demonic writings and symbols on the walls, remnants of his satanic worship. More disturbingly, they found holes in the walls. David claimed he heard demonic voices emanating from these holes, ordering him to kill. Sometimes he would try to punch the walls to silence the voices, but they persisted continuously. There were notes written beside each hole, documenting the demon's commands. One such note read, "Hello, my name is Mr. William, and I live in this hole with several children whom I'm raising to become murderers. I'm excited to watch them grow." These notes, written by David beside the holes, were supposedly transcriptions of the voices he claimed to hear. The lead investigator on the case stated that this was the most chilling experience of his career as an officer, evoking chills whenever he recalled it. During interrogations, David confessed to all his crimes and spoke about the demons he claimed to hear from the walls. He elaborated on his neighbor's dog, whose constant barking he interpreted as a demonic command to kill. He delved into all these bizarre details. Some journalists and conspiracy theorists believe Son of Sam wasn't a single person but part of a satanic cult, suggesting that David wasn't acting alone and that multiple members of this group carried out the murders. One journalist, Maury Terry, dedicated his life to researching this theory. Literally, he spent his entire life investigating the case until his death, remaining steadfast in his belief about the satanic cult. He authored a book titled The Ultimate Evil and even inspired a Netflix documentary series exploring his investigations and theories about the cult. Honestly, I couldn't finish the series because it contained many unsettling theories and dragged on, with each episode lasting an hour. Nonetheless, the man genuinely devoted his life to this topic, always arguing that investigators hadn't probed deeply enough and closed the case too hastily. This aspect in itself is intriguing. Returning to our story, David was tried, and at the end of the trial, he was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, one for each of his 6 victims. In the early years of his imprisonment, he was extremely violent, engaging in brutal fights with other inmates. In one instance, another prisoner attacked him, inflicting a deep wound on his neck. Remarkably, after a decade in prison, David underwent a complete transformation. He became a devout Christian, peaceful and nonviolent. Not only that, but he also began preaching and advising fellow inmates. Initially, I suspected this might be an act to gain parole eligibility, especially since he legally qualified for parole consideration in 2002. I thought perhaps he was pretending to be a reformed, good-natured man to improve his chances during parole hearings. Legally, even if he qualified, a parole board would likely reject his release 99% of the time, given his status as a serial killer. In the end, however, David himself wrote to the parole board, requesting they cancel his hearing. In his letter, he candidly stated, "I believe I deserve to remain in prison for the rest of my life. With God's help, I've come to terms with my situation and accept my punishment." Every 2 years, he became eligible for parole consideration, but he never attended a hearing or sought freedom. To this day, Son of Sam remains incarcerated. And with that, we've reached the end of our story. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. We also have other amazing past videos you can enjoy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, farewell.